Good evening, background historian crew. As per usual, we've got an intriguing episode for you tonight. We will follow the path of the Prophet Muhammad and explore his life, legacy, and journey to becoming the forefather of the Muslim world. Let's get straight into it. Part 1: Arabia before Islam. Introduction: A world awaiting change. To understand the life of the Prophet Muhammad, we must first travel back to the Arabia of the 6th century, a land of deserts and oases, tribes and caravans, poetry and warfare. This was the stage upon which one of history's most transformative stories would unfold. The Arabian Peninsula was not united, it was a mosaic of clans, cultures, and beliefs, bound together by commerce and divided by loyalty to bloodlines. Yet within its sands and cities lay the seeds of a spiritual and social transformation that would ripple across the globe. Geography and environment. Arabia was a land of extremes. To the north, Roman and Byzantine influence brushed against desert frontiers. To the east, the Sasanian Persian Empire cast its shadow. To the south, in Yemen, ancient kingdoms flourished on incense trade routes. The heart of Arabia, however, was a vast desert, its inhabitants reliant on camels, goats, and caravans for survival. Life here was unforgiving, but it bred resilience. The desert was more than just a physical landscape, it shaped the character of its people. Harsh climates demanded loyalty to kin and tribe, as survival depended on collective strength. A person's honor was inseparable from the reputation of their clan, and betrayal could mean exile, which was often a death sentence. Tribal society. Arabia before Islam was organized around tribes and clans, each bound by kinship and custom. The system was fiercely protective but also restrictive. Tribes provided safety, identity, and justice, but also engaged in endless feuds. Revenge killings could span generations, and alliances shifted constantly. Leadership was not hereditary alone but depended on charisma, generosity, and strength. A leader, called a sheikh, had to embody both courage and the ability to provide for his people. For those without a tribe, life was precarious. Orphans, widows, and the enslaved were vulnerable, often marginalized. This societal structure helps explain why Muhammad's message of community, justice, and equality later struck so deeply. It directly challenged this system. Mecca, a sacred city. Among Arabia's many settlements, Mecca stood out. Nestled in a valley with limited agriculture, it survived through trade and its status as a religious center. Caravans passed through Mecca, connecting Yemen in the south to the Levant and beyond. At its heart stood the Kaaba, a cube-shaped sanctuary believed to date back to Abraham and Ishmael, though by the 6th century it housed idols of numerous gods worshipped by Arabian tribes. Despite the polytheism, the Kaaba was sacred ground, violence was forbidden within its vicinity, making Mecca a place of peace where tribes could meet, trade, and worship. Religion before Islam. Arabia was religiously diverse. Polytheism, most tribes worshipped multiple gods, often linked to natural forces or tribal guardians. Monotheists, there were also Jews and Christians, particularly in Yemen and the north, as well as smaller groups of Hanifs who sought a pure form of Abrahamic monotheism. Spiritual practices, pilgrimages to the Kaaba, sacrifices, and oracular practices were common. This pluralism meant Arabia was familiar with the idea of one god but deeply tied to traditions of many gods. Economy and culture. Commerce was central to Arabian life. Caravans carried spices, textiles, frankincense, and other goods across vast deserts. Mecca's Quraysh tribe, to which Muhammad would belong, held prestige by managing these caravans and overseeing the Kaaba. Arabia also prized poetry. Poets were the historians, entertainers, and spokesmen of their tribes. In the absence of written literature, oral verse preserved genealogies, celebrated victories, and lamented losses. Poetry contests were held at markets, with winning verses memorized for generations. Social hierarchies and injustices. Pre-Islamic Arabia was a world of contrasts, Hospitality and honor thrived alongside cruelty and inequality. Slavery, enslavement was common, often the fate of war captives. Women, their status varied, some held influence in trade or family, but many were treated as property. Infanticide of daughters was a tragic reality in certain tribes. The marginalized, orphans, the poor, and those without tribal protection lived on society's fringes. It was into this world that Muhammad was born, an orphan, vulnerable yet destined to reshape these very structures. Closing reflection. Arabia before Islam was a land of contradictions. Fiercely loyal tribes and brutal feuds, sacred sanctuaries amidst idol worship, poetry, and trade flourishing beside poverty and injustice. It was a society held together by custom but yearning, perhaps unknowingly, for transformation. The harsh desert forged resilience, the Kaaba offered unity, and the spiritual search for truth remained unresolved. As you rest, picture the sands of Arabia stretching endlessly, caravans crossing under starlit skies, and the Kaaba standing quietly in Mecca, an ancient stone cube waiting for a story that would change the course of history. Part 2: The Early Life of Muhammad. Introduction: An orphan in Mecca. In 570 CE, in the bustling city of Mecca, a boy was born into the respected Quraysh tribe. This boy would one day grow into Muhammad, the prophet of Islam. Yet his early life was marked not by privilege, but by hardship, loss, and resilience. Orphaned at a young age, raised by guardians, and known for his honesty, his childhood shaped the character that later guided a spiritual revolution. To understand his mission, we must first understand his formative years. The Year of the Elephant. Muhammad's birth coincided with a remarkable event. In the same year, Mecca was threatened by an invasion led by the Abyssinian general Abraha, who sought to destroy the Kaaba and redirect pilgrimage to his cathedral in Yemen. According to tradition, Abraha's army, equipped with elephants, was mysteriously halted before reaching Mecca. This became known as the Year of the Elephant, remembered as both a calamity averted and a sign of divine protection over the city. Muhammad's entry into the world during this year would later be seen as symbolic, a child born in a time of crisis who would later change the course of history. Orphanhood and early loss. Muhammad's father, Abdullah, died before his son's birth, leaving him fatherless from the start. His mother, Amina, raised him with affection, but she too died when he was only 6 years old, during a journey returning from Medina. Left without parents, Muhammad became an orphan in a society where tribal protection meant survival. His grandfather, Abd al-Muttalib, the respected custodian of the Kaaba, took him in, showering him with care. But within 2 years, his grandfather passed away, and guardianship fell to his uncle, Abu Talib. These repeated losses instilled in Muhammad a deep empathy for the vulnerable, orphans, widows, and the poor, a concern that would later define his teachings. Life under Abu Talib. Abu Talib was not wealthy, but he was generous and respected. He raised Muhammad alongside his own children, providing him with protection and a place within the Quraysh clan. Under Abu Talib's guidance, Muhammad learned the values of tribal loyalty, patience, and perseverance. It was during these years that Muhammad began working, first as a shepherd, tending flocks in the hills around Mecca. This quiet work instilled independence and contemplation, qualities that later marked his character. Many prophets before him, from Moses to David, were also shepherds, and Muhammad would one day remark on the humility and discipline this role required. Reputation as Al-Amin, the trustworthy. As he grew, Muhammad gained a reputation in Mecca for his honesty, reliability, and fairness. Known as Al-Amin, the trustworthy, he was sought after to mediate disputes and safeguard valuables. In a city where commerce thrived on trust, his character became his greatest asset. Even before his prophetic mission, Muhammad's integrity stood out. Unlike many young men of his age, he avoided drinking, gambling, and idol worship, distancing himself from practices he saw as corrupt. Though not yet a prophet, he was already quietly different. Exposure to the wider world. Under Abu Talib's care, Muhammad traveled with caravans on trading journeys, gaining exposure to lands beyond Arabia. On one such journey to Syria, he observed the workings of foreign markets, cultures, and faiths. Traditions hold that during this trip, a Christian monk named Hira noticed signs of greatness in the young boy, foreshadowing his future role. These experiences broadened Muhammad's worldview, teaching him about economic exchange, diplomacy, and religious diversity, skills and knowledge that would serve him later as a leader. Marriage to Khadija. In his 20s, Muhammad took up work as a merchant for Khadija, a wealthy widow and successful businesswoman. Impressed by his honesty and skill, Khadija entrusted him with managing her caravans. Their professional relationship blossomed into respect and love, and Khadija proposed marriage. Their union was a turning point. Khadija became Muhammad's confidant, partner, and supporter throughout the most difficult moments of his prophetic mission. Their marriage was built on loyalty, mutual respect, and affection, lasting until her death. Reflection: a childhood of trials and strength. Muhammad's early years were defined by loss and resilience. From orphanhood to shepherding, from caravan journeys to marriage with Khadija, each experience shaped his empathy, patience, and character. He understood the pain of vulnerability, the importance of trust, and the value of community, all lessons that would later echo through his message of justice, mercy, and compassion. Closing scene for sleep. As you drift into rest, imagine the young Muhammad under the desert stars, tending sheep on the hills outside Mecca. Picture the quiet boy who had lost so much, yet carried within him a calm strength and a reputation for honesty. He could not yet know that one day, the world would remember him not only as an orphan, not only as Al-Amin, but as the messenger of God whose words would reach billions. Part 3, Muhammad the Merchant. Introduction: from shepherd to merchant. After years of hardship as an orphan and shepherd, Muhammad entered the next stage of his life, the world of trade. Mecca thrived as a commercial hub, its wealth tied to caravans crossing the deserts of Arabia, linking Yemen and Syria, Africa and Persia. It was in this bustling environment that Muhammad built his reputation as a trustworthy merchant, deepening the qualities of fairness, honesty, and insight that would define his leadership. His years in trade not only secured his livelihood, but also exposed him to the wider world, preparing him for the monumental mission ahead. The caravan economy of Mecca. Trade was Mecca's lifeblood. Twice a year, caravans traveled north to Syria and south to Yemen, carrying goods like frankincense, spices, textiles, and leather. The Quraysh tribe, Muhammad's own, held prestige by managing these expeditions and protecting the Kaaba, ensuring Mecca's central role in Arabian commerce. Merchants were more than sellers of goods, they were diplomats, negotiators, and cultural brokers. In their hands lay the survival of their families and tribes, making integrity a vital currency. Muhammad's entry into this world was natural, given his growing reputation for honesty. The reputation of Al-Amin in trade. Muhammad's honesty had already earned him the title Al-Amin, the trustworthy, in his youth. In a society often marred by deceit in trade, false weights, inflated prices, and broken promises, his integrity stood out. Stories spread of his fairness in bargaining and reliability in keeping agreements. Merchants and families entrusted him with their goods, confident he would return profits without dishonesty. This reputation gave him opportunities to rise in a competitive world where trust was rare but invaluable. Employment with Khadija. One of the pivotal chapters of Muhammad's life began when he entered the service of Khadija, a wealthy widow and accomplished businesswoman of Mecca. Known for her intelligence and enterprise, Khadija employed agents to manage her trading caravans. Hearing of Muhammad's integrity, she entrusted him with a caravan to Syria. The journey was a resounding success. Muhammad conducted trade with honesty and skill, returning with profits that exceeded expectations. His conduct impressed Khadija's servants, who praised his fairness and diligence. Khadija, already respected in Meccan society, saw in Muhammad not only a capable merchant but a man of rare character. Their partnership would soon blossom into marriage, one that became a foundation for his future mission. Exposure to foreign cultures and faiths. Through trade journeys, Muhammad encountered diverse peoples, languages, and beliefs. In Syria, he would have met Christians, Jews, and followers of other traditions. He saw the great markets of the Levant and the wealth of empires like Byzantium. These experiences widened his perspective beyond Mecca's tribal world. He observed both the prosperity of organized states and the inequalities within them. He listened, learned, and reflected, absorbing lessons that would shape his later vision of a just and unified community. Personal qualities in business. Muhammad's approach to commerce revealed traits that later defined his leadership. Patience, he endured long, grueling caravan journeys through deserts. Fairness, he avoided exploiting partners or customers, even when he could profit more. Respect for the vulnerable. Unlike some merchants, he did not cheat the poor or powerless. Humility, despite success, he remained modest in demeanor, uninterested in arrogance or display. These qualities made him not just a successful merchant, but an admired human being in a city where greed often overshadowed morality. The marriage to Khadija. Khadija, moved by Muhammad's character and impressed by his capabilities, proposed marriage. Despite being older than him, their union was one of deep respect, affection, and loyalty. Their marriage was blessed with children, and Khadija became Muhammad's most trusted confidant. In years to come, when he would receive his first revelations and face rejection, she would stand firmly by his side, offering unwavering faith and comfort. This marriage not only provided Muhammad with stability but also elevated his social standing, giving him influence and freedom to pursue greater reflections and responsibilities. Reflection, preparation for leadership. Muhammad's years as a merchant were more than a career, they were preparation. Through trade, he learned about diplomacy, fairness, patience, and diversity. Through marriage to Khadija, he found emotional support and stability. Through his reputation as Al-Amin, he gained trust that would later become crucial when he called people to faith. Closing scene for sleep. As you drift into rest, imagine a caravan winding its way across the golden sands of Arabia. Camels carry silks, spices, and leather under the blazing sun. At the front of the caravan rides Muhammad, calm, patient, and trusted, his reputation shining brighter than the desert's heat. He does not yet know that the lessons of commerce and character will one day guide him in leading a community, a faith, and a global transformation. Part 4, The First Revelation. Introduction, a turning point in human history. By the age of 40, Muhammad had established himself in Mecca as a respected merchant, husband, and member of the Quraysh tribe. Known as Al-Amin, the trustworthy, he was admired for his honesty and fairness. Yet within him burned a quiet unease at the state of his society. Tribal feuds, inequality, idol worship, and the neglect of the poor weighed heavily on his heart. To find peace and clarity, he often retreated into solitude in the caves surrounding Mecca. It was in one of these moments of reflection, on the slopes of Mount Hira, that the course of his life, and the history of the world, was forever changed. Seeking solitude, retreats on Mount Hira. Outside the noise and bustle of Mecca lay a small cave on Mount Hira, a rugged hill northeast of the city. Here, Muhammad spent nights in meditation and prayer, reflecting on the mysteries of creation and the injustices of society. He was not alone in this search. Some Arabs known as Hanif sought a pure form of monotheism, worshipping the God of Abraham. Muhammad, however, did not yet know what he was searching for. His heart was restless, yearning for truth. Khadija, his wife, supported his retreats, sending provisions and encouraging his search for meaning. The Night of Destiny. It was during one of these retreats, in the month of Ramadan, that Muhammad's life changed forever. In the stillness of the cave, an overwhelming presence filled the space. The angel Gabriel appeared, commanding him with a single word, Iqra, read. Recite. Startled and trembling, Muhammad replied, I am not of those who read. Again the command came, recite. And again he protested his inability. The angel embraced him, pressing him until he thought he could bear it no longer, and repeated. Recite in the name of your Lord who created men from a clot. Recite, for your Lord is most generous. Who taught by the pen? Taught man what he knew not. These words became the first verses of the Quran, a message that would expand into a scripture guiding millions. Shock and fear. The encounter left Muhammad shaken to his core. Overwhelmed and unsure of what had happened, he fled the cave and hurried home. His body trembled as he entered his house, calling out, "Cover me, cover me." Khadija wrapped him in blankets and soothed him, listening as he recounted the vision. Rather than doubt him, Khadija reassured him with unwavering faith, "By God, he will never disgrace you. You keep good relations with kin, you help the poor, you support the weak, you honor guests, and you aid those in distress." Her words gave him strength. Khadija's support and Waraqa's confirmation. Khadija took Muhammad to her cousin Waraqa ibn Nawfal, a Christian scholar familiar with scripture. After hearing the account, Waraqa declared, "This is the same angel who came to Moses. You are the prophet of this nation." Though reassuring, the realization also foreshadowed trials ahead. Your people will oppose you, drive you out, and wage war against you. This recognition marked the beginning of Muhammad's prophetic mission, but it also warned of the immense struggles he would face. The weight of prophethood. In the days that followed, Muhammad continued to experience revelations, sometimes through the angel Gabriel, sometimes as inspirations weighing heavily on his heart. These experiences were intense, sweat would form even on cold days, and he felt the weight of divine words pressing upon him. Yet he memorized every phrase, later reciting them to his followers with precision. At first, he kept the message private, sharing it only with Khadija, his cousin Ali, his friend Abu Bakr, and a small circle of close companions. The revelations called for worship of the one God, care for the poor, and a life of justice and mercy. Spiritual and social impact. The first revelation was more than a personal transformation, it was a moment that altered history. It introduced a new scripture, the Quran, revealed gradually, would become Islam's sacred text. Shifted values, it challenged Mecca's practices of idol worship, inequality, and neglect of the weak. Redefined identity, Muhammad was no longer just Al-Amin, he was now the messenger of God. The early revelations carried themes of creation, accountability, and compassion, calling humanity back to its moral core. Reflection, a cave, a beginning. In that cave on Mount Hira, a man who could neither read nor write became the vehicle of a message that would reach every corner of the globe. His fear turned to faith, his solitude to community, and his quiet reflection to proclamation. The first revelation was not only the beginning of Muhammad's mission, it was the dawn of a new civilization. Closing scene for sleep. As you close your eyes, picture the desert night, still and star-filled. Imagine a lone figure in a cave, trembling at the weight of words that would outlast empires. Recite in the name of your Lord who created. The world outside remains unaware, caravans still move, poets still sing, but history has already shifted. A whisper in the dark of Hira has begun a story that will echo for centuries. Part 5, Early Followers and Persecution in Mecca. Introduction, a message in the shadows. The first revelations marked the birth of Islam, but for years it remained a fragile and private movement. In the bustling streets of Mecca, the message of one God and justice for the poor spread quietly among trusted circles. Yet the Quraysh, guardians of Mecca's traditions and wealth, soon recognized the challenge this new faith posed to their power. What began with whispers of belief would lead to persecution, exile, and resilience. The first believers. The earliest followers were those closest to Muhammad, people who knew his character and trusted his integrity. Khadija. His wife was the very first believer, offering not only her faith but also her emotional and financial support. Ali ibn Abi Talib, his young cousin, raised in Muhammad's household, accepted Islam in his youth. Abu Bakr, a close friend and respected merchant, Abu Bakr became one of Islam's strongest supporters, later playing a pivotal role as the first caliph. Zayd ibn Haritha, a freed slave and adopted son of Muhammad, Zayd's loyalty was unwavering. Bilal ibn Rabah, an enslaved African man who embraced Islam, Bilal became known for his powerful voice in calling believers to prayer. These early converts were diverse, men and women, wealthy and poor, free and enslaved. Their acceptance showed that Islam was not bound by tribe, class, or status. Private gatherings and quiet teaching. At first, Muhammad did not preach openly. For 3 years, the message spread privately, through personal relationships and quiet conversations. Meetings were held in homes, including the House of Al-Arqam, where early Muslims prayed and learned. The themes were radical: belief in one God, rejection of idols, care for orphans, honesty in trade, and accountability on the Day of Judgment. For the powerful Quraysh, this message threatened not only their religion but their economy, which thrived on pilgrimage to the Kaaba's idols. The Quraysh opposition. As Islam gained followers, the Quraysh grew alarmed. They feared economic loss. If the idols of the Kaaba were rejected, Mecca's religious tourism and trade could decline. Social disruption. Islam's call for equality undermined tribal hierarchies. Political authority. Muhammad's influence threatened their leadership. They began campaigns of ridicule, bribery, and eventually violence to suppress the movement. Persecution of the vulnerable. The Quraysh targeted those without tribal protection. Bilal ibn Rabah. His master tortured him under the scorching sun, placing heavy stones on his chest. Yet Bilal refused to renounce his faith, repeating only, Ahad, Ahad, one, one. Sumayya bint Kayat, among the first martyrs of Islam, she was killed for refusing to abandon her belief. Other slaves and the poor, many were beaten, starved, or ostracized, while wealthy converts like Abu Bakr used their resources to buy their freedom. The cruelty highlighted the courage of the early believers, who endured suffering with patience. Muhammad's own trials. Though protected by his uncle Abu Talib's position in the Quraysh, Muhammad faced ridicule, slander, and pressure. Leaders offered him wealth, power, and marriage if only he would abandon his mission. He refused, declaring, "If they placed the sun in my right hand and the moon in my left, I would not abandon this mission." This steadfastness, even in the face of temptation and danger, inspired his followers to hold firm. The public call. After 3 years of private preaching, Muhammad was commanded to proclaim the message openly. Standing on the hill of Safa in Mecca, he called out to his kin, warning them of accountability before God. While some listened, others mocked and dismissed him. From this moment, the opposition hardened, and persecution intensified. The seeds of community. Despite hardship, the early Muslim community grew in strength and solidarity. They prayed together, shared resources, and comforted one another in trials. The Quran's revelations during this period emphasized patience, endurance, and hope in God's justice. Islam was no longer just Muhammad's personal mission, it was a small but determined community, united by faith and bound by resilience. Reflection: faith in the face of fire. The story of the early Muslims is one of courage against overwhelming odds. They were few in number, mocked, tortured, and ostracized, yet their faith only deepened. Their example set a precedent for generations to come, that belief in justice, equality, and one God was worth any sacrifice. Closing scene for sleep. As you drift into rest, imagine the narrow streets of Mecca under the desert sun. A small group gathers quietly in a modest house, whispering verses of the Quran, their hearts filled with faith though the world stands against them. Outside, the Quraysh scheme and threaten, but inside, hope glows like a hidden flame. That flame, fragile yet enduring, would one day light an entire civilization. Part 6: Migration and the Search for Refuge. Introduction: Pressure in Mecca. As the message of Islam grew, so did the hostility of the Quraysh. What began as ridicule turned into economic sanctions, torture, and threats of death. Muhammad's followers, many of them poor, enslaved, or without tribal protection, bore the brunt of the persecution. With their survival at stake, Muhammad sought solutions beyond Mecca's walls. In doing so, Islam took its first steps outward, planting seeds that would spread across regions. The boycott and suffering. The Quraysh, frustrated that persuasion and threats had not silenced Muhammad, enacted a harsh social and economic boycott against his clan, the Banu Hashim. For nearly 3 years, they were forced to live in a valley on the outskirts of Mecca, cut off from trade and marriage alliances. Hunger and deprivation marked these years, with followers eating leaves to survive. It was a test of patience and faith. Despite suffering, the community held firm, united under Muhammad's leadership. The search for refuge, Abyssinia. Realizing the dangers his followers faced, Muhammad advised some to seek safety in a land ruled by a just king, the Christian kingdom of Abyssinia, modern-day Ethiopia. A small group of Muslims fled Mecca, crossing the Red Sea to find sanctuary under the Negus. When Quraysh envoys pursued them, hoping to have them extradited, the Muslims defended their faith before the king. One of them, Ja'far ibn Abi Talib, eloquently recited verses from the Quran about Jesus and Mary. The Negus, moved by the similarities with Christian belief, refused to hand them over. This marked one of Islam's first interfaith encounters, establishing a precedent of mutual respect and peaceful coexistence. Escalating hostility in Mecca. Back in Mecca, pressure intensified. Prominent followers such as Bilal, Ammar ibn Yasir, and others faced brutal torture. Muhammad himself remained under the protection of his uncle Abu Talib, but threats on his life grew sharper. The Quraysh's frustration was not only spiritual, it was economic. The Kaaba's idols attracted pilgrims from across Arabia, sustaining Mecca's wealth. Islam's monotheism threatened to upend this system, challenging both belief and profit. The Year of Sorrow. Around this time, Muhammad suffered 2 devastating personal losses, the death of his wife Khadija and his uncle Abu Talib. Khadija had been his confidant and source of emotional strength, while Abu Talib had protected him politically from Quraysh aggression. Without them, Muhammad was vulnerable, and this year came to be known as the Year of Sorrow. The journey to Taif. Seeking new support, Muhammad traveled to the nearby city of Taif. Instead of welcoming him, its leaders mocked and rejected him, even inciting children to throw stones. Exhausted and wounded, Muhammad prayed for strength rather than revenge, embodying the patience and mercy that became hallmarks of his mission. Though disheartened, this journey revealed a critical truth: his message was not bound to Mecca alone. Islam's horizon was broader. Revelation of hope. During these years of trial, revelations from the Quran provided guidance and consolation. Verses emphasized endurance, the fate of earlier prophets, and the promise that truth would prevail despite opposition. They gave the early Muslims a sense of purpose larger than their immediate struggles. Seeds of migration to Medina. Though Mecca was increasingly hostile, Muhammad began meeting people from other tribes during the pilgrimage season. Some from the city of Yathrib, later Medina, listened with interest. Their openness hinted at a new future, one where Islam might find not only refuge, but also the foundation of a new community. Reflection: a community under fire. The migration to Abyssinia and the suffering in Mecca showed the resilience of Muhammad's followers. They endured hunger, torture, and exile, yet their faith deepened. The Quraysh could not extinguish the flame of belief; if anything, their oppression fanned it brighter. Closing scene for sleep. As you rest, picture the quiet sea between Arabia and Abyssinia. Small boats carry weary families across its waters, seeking refuge in a foreign land. Behind them, Mecca bristles with hostility. Ahead lies safety under a king who understands their words. In the silence of the waves, a truth emerges: though fragile, this faith will endure, and its journey has only just begun. Part 7: The Night Journey, Isra and Miraj. Introduction: a journey beyond earth. Amid hardship and grief, Muhammad experienced one of the most extraordinary moments of his life, an event remembered as the Isra and Miraj, the night journey and ascension. At a time when the Prophet was mourning the loss of Khadija and Abu Talib, and facing rejection from Mecca, this miraculous journey served as a source of renewal, reassurance, and spiritual strength. It was a vision that connected earth to heaven, Jerusalem to Mecca, and humanity to the divine. The context of despair. Known as the Year of Sorrow, this period left Muhammad vulnerable and isolated. With his greatest supporters gone and Quraysh hostility unrelenting, he bore a heavy burden. It was during this time of trial that he was given a vision unlike any other, a journey meant to remind him of his mission's divine support and to strengthen his resolve. The Isra, the night journey to Jerusalem. According to tradition, Muhammad was taken from the Kaaba in Mecca to the farthest mosque, later identified as Jerusalem's Al-Aqsa Mosque. The journey was made on Al-Buraq, a mystical creature described as faster than lightning. In Jerusalem, Muhammad led previous prophets, Abraham, Moses, Jesus, and others, in prayer. This symbolized both continuity and culmination. Islam was not a break from earlier revelations, but a continuation of the same divine message. The Miraj, the ascension through the heavens. From Jerusalem, Muhammad ascended through the heavens, guided by the angel Gabriel. At each level, he met earlier prophets. Adam at the first heaven, representing humanity's beginning. Jesus and John the Baptist, embodying compassion and piety. Joseph, symbol of beauty and resilience. Enoch, Idris, associated with wisdom. Aaron, known for priesthood. Moses, symbol of law and perseverance. Abraham, the patriarch, near the highest heaven. Finally, Muhammad reached a place beyond Gabriel's reach, near the Lot tree of the utmost boundary. There he experienced the divine presence, receiving spiritual gifts, including the command for prayer, initially set at 50 times daily, later reduced to 5 through Moses' intercession. The return to Mecca. The journey concluded with Muhammad's return to Mecca the same night. When he recounted the experience, many Quraysh mocked him, dismissing it as impossible. Yet for believers, it became a powerful affirmation of faith, a miracle that connected the Prophet to realms unseen. Symbolism and spiritual meaning. The Isra and Miraj carried profound meanings. Affirmation of prophethood. Muhammad's leadership among earlier prophets symbolized his role as the seal of prophecy. Centrality of prayer. The 5 daily prayers became a cornerstone of Muslim life, a direct gift from this journey. Hope amid trials. At a time of grief, the vision reassured Muhammad that his mission was divinely supported. Sacred geography. It connected Mecca to Jerusalem, both sanctified in Islamic tradition. The legacy of the night journey. For Muslims, the Isra and Miraj remains one of the most spiritually significant events, commemorated annually. It affirms that in the darkest of times, divine reassurance is near. The prayers instituted during this journey became the heartbeat of Muslim devotion, uniting billions across centuries in rhythm with Muhammad's own command. Reflection, light in darkness. The night journey was more than a miracle, it was a turning point of hope. At his lowest, Muhammad was lifted to the highest heavens, shown both the legacy of prophets before him and the mission that lay ahead. His return to earth was not the end of a vision, but the renewal of purpose. Closing scene for sleep. As you rest, imagine the stillness of a Meccan night. A lone figure prays by the Kaaba, unaware that this night will carry him beyond earth. Picture the luminous creature Al-Buraq, the vast expanse of the heavens, and prophets welcoming him one by one. Above all, imagine the moment of quiet awe when he stood in divine presence, carrying back a gift that would echo in every prayer whispered by his followers for centuries to come. Part 8, The Hijra to Medina. Introduction, a fateful departure. By the year 622 CE, the situation in Mecca had become unbearable. The small Muslim community faced relentless persecution, economic sanctions, and threats of violence. Yet in the northern city of Yathrib, later renamed Medina, a different future awaited. The migration, known as the Hijra, was more than a move from one city to another. It marked the transformation of Islam from a small persecuted faith into a thriving community with political, social, and spiritual dimensions. Seeds of Medina's invitation. During the pilgrimage seasons in Mecca, Muhammad would speak to visiting tribes. Among them were people from Yathrib, a city divided by constant conflict between two main Arab tribes, the Aws and the Khazraj, as well as home to several Jewish communities. These groups longed for peace and saw in Muhammad a potential unifier. Delegations from Yathrib pledged their loyalty to him in a series of agreements known as the Pledges of Aqaba, promising protection and allegiance if he and his followers migrated north. Quraysh opposition intensifies. The Quraysh sensed danger. Muhammad's growing influence, combined with external support, threatened their control. They plotted to assassinate him, with representatives from various clans assigned to strike together so that no single tribe could be blamed. This plan, however, would be foiled. The night of escape. Warned of the plot, Muhammad instructed his followers to leave Mecca in small groups, slipping away quietly to Medina. One night, as assassins surrounded his house, Muhammad asked his cousin Ali to sleep in his bed, while he himself escaped with Abu Bakr. Covered by darkness and divine protection, he slipped past his would-be killers. The assassins were stunned in the morning to find Ali in his place and realized Muhammad had fled. Enraged, they pursued him into the desert. The journey north. The Hijra was no simple relocation, it was a perilous trek of about 200 miles across harsh desert terrain. Muhammad and Abu Bakr hid in the cave of Thor, where tradition says a spider spun its web and a dove nested at the entrance, making pursuers believe the cave was untouched. After days of hiding, they set out toward Medina, guided by a skilled tracker. Along the way, tribes offered support, and some individuals attempted to capture them for reward, but each attempt failed. The journey was filled with tension, yet it also revealed divine signs of reassurance. Arrival in Medina. When Muhammad finally entered Medina, crowds welcomed him with joy, singing verses of celebration. For the first time, he and his followers were free to practice their faith openly and to organize as a community. Medina was diverse, Arab tribes, Jewish communities, and new Muslims all lived together. Muhammad's first acts included building the Mosque of the Prophet, which became a center of worship, community, and governance. The Constitution of Medina. To manage the city's diversity, Muhammad established a remarkable document, the Constitution of Medina. This agreement recognized Muslims, Jews, and other groups as part of one political community, bound to mutual defense and justice while allowing each to practice their own faith. This was a groundbreaking move. Religion, politics, and society were woven into a single framework of cooperation. Transformation of the Ummah. The Hijra was not just about relocation. It signaled a shift. From faith to community. Islam became more than belief, it was a living society. From persecution to power, the Muslims gained political authority and military strength. From local to universal, Medina became the base for Islam's expansion beyond Arabia. Spiritual significance of the Hijra. For Muslims, the Hijra is more than a historical migration, it marks the beginning of the Islamic calendar, a recognition of its importance as the birth of the Muslim community. It was a declaration that faith is not just personal but social, tied to justice, governance, and unity. Reflection, leaving home for a new horizon. The Hijra tested the loyalty and sacrifice of Muhammad's followers. They left behind homes, wealth, and families, stepping into the unknown. Yet in Medina they found security, solidarity, and the foundation of a new civilization. Closing scene for sleep. As you drift into rest, imagine a weary group of travelers crossing the desert under starlit skies. Behind them lies Mecca, filled with danger and hostility. Ahead, Medina, glowing with promise. At the center of it all walks Muhammad, calm, steadfast, carrying not only his own destiny but the hopes of a people and the seeds of a global faith. Part 9, Building the Ummah. Introduction, a new beginning in Medina. The migration to Medina did not simply mark a change of location, it marked the birth of something new. In Mecca, Islam was a fragile faith community under siege. In Medina, it became a society, a community bound by shared belief, mutual responsibility, and a vision for justice. This society, known as the Ummah, was unlike anything Arabia had seen before. It was built not on bloodline or tribe, but on faith, moral values, and collective duty. The mosque as the center. One of Muhammad's first actions in Medina was the construction of a mosque, known today as the Prophet's Mosque. Built simply of mud walls and palm trunks, it was more than a house of prayer. It became a place of worship and community. A court where disputes were settled. A council hall for political discussions. A school where revelation was taught. The mosque embodied the heart of the Ummah, faith intertwined with daily life, spirituality inseparable from social and political responsibilities. Brotherhood between emigrants and helpers. The Muslims who migrated from Mecca, Muhajirin, left behind homes and wealth. To integrate them into Medina, Muhammad established bonds of brotherhood between the Muhajirin and the local Muslims of Medina, Ansar. Each pair supported one another as if they were family, sharing homes, food, and responsibilities. This act dissolved tribal divisions and forged a new unity. It showed that the Ummah was not built on blood, but on shared values of generosity and solidarity. The Constitution of Medina. To manage Medina's diverse society, Muslims, Jewish tribes, and others, Muhammad drafted an unprecedented agreement known as the Constitution of Medina. This document recognized all groups as part of one community while respecting their distinct beliefs. Established mutual defense and collective responsibility. Outlined principles of justice, cooperation, and protection of the vulnerable. It was a pioneering charter of pluralism, showing Muhammad's vision of society was not exclusive but inclusive. Social and economic reforms. Muhammad's leadership addressed inequality and injustice. Support for the poor, charity, zakat, was institutionalized, redistributing wealth to care for orphans, widows, and the needy. Fair trade, fraud in the markets was condemned, honesty in business elevated as a moral duty. Women's rights, women were granted inheritance rights and protection from exploitation, setting precedents in a society where many were marginalized. The Ummah was not only a spiritual community, but a social revolution. A community bound by prayer. Daily prayers, instituted earlier, now became public and communal. The call to prayer, Adhan, was introduced, echoing across Medina. This rhythm of worship, 5 times a day, reinforced unity, discipline, and the shared identity of the Ummah. Challenges of integration. Building unity was not easy. Old rivalries between Medina's tribes lingered. Jewish and pagan communities had complex relationships with the Muslims. Economic hardship tested solidarity. Yet Muhammad's leadership emphasized patience, dialogue, and fairness, gradually strengthening the bonds of community. Spiritual growth. Revelations during this period shifted focus from endurance under persecution to guidance for community life. Verses of the Quran addressed laws, morality, and collective ethics, laying the foundations of Islamic civilization. Reflection, a new model of society. The Ummah in Medina was revolutionary. For the first time, loyalty was not determined by tribe or clan, but by shared values of faith, justice, and compassion. It showed that humanity could unite above divisions, guided by principles greater than ancestry. Closing scene for sleep. As you close your eyes, imagine Medina at dusk. The call to prayer drifts across the settlement. Families share meals, strangers are welcomed as brothers, and justice is promised not just to the strong but to the weak. At the heart of it all stands Muhammad, leading not only in worship but in governance, weaving a society from threads of compassion, justice, and faith. The Ummah is born, and with it, a vision that will carry forward into history. Part 10, Conflict with Mecca. Introduction, tensions boil over. The migration to Medina brought relief to Muhammad and his followers, but it did not end their conflict with the Quraysh of Mecca. In fact, it intensified. The Quraysh saw Islam not only as a religious challenge but also as a threat to their political and economic dominance. What followed was a series of confrontations. Battles that would test the faith, unity, and resilience of the young Muslim community, and that would reveal Muhammad's skill not only as a prophet but also as a strategist, diplomat, and leader. Caravan raids and rising tensions. In Medina, many Muslims had left behind their wealth and property in Mecca. To reclaim some of what was lost and weaken the Quraysh, Muhammad permitted limited raids on Meccan caravans. These raids were not indiscriminate, they were strategic, targeting the Quraysh's lifeblood, trade. The Quraysh, furious at these disruptions, prepared for open conflict. The Battle of Badr, 624 CE. The first major confrontation came at Badr, a valley southwest of Medina. The Muslims, numbering around 300, faced a Meccan force 3 times their size. Despite being outnumbered and under-equipped, the Muslims achieved a stunning victory. This triumph had immense significance. Spiritually, it confirmed to the believers that God's support was with them. Politically, it boosted Muhammad's credibility in Medina and beyond. Socially, it marked Islam as a force to be reckoned with. The Quran described this moment as a sign of divine assistance, reminding the community that victory does not come from numbers but from faith and resolve. The Battle of Uhud, 625 CE. The Quraysh, humiliated, regrouped for revenge. The next year they marched toward Medina with an army of 3,000. The Muslims met them at Mount Uhud. At first, the Muslims had the upper hand. But a group of archers, disobeying Muhammad's order to hold their position, left their post to collect spoils. This opened a gap in the defense, allowing Quraysh cavalry to strike. The Muslims suffered heavy losses, and Muhammad himself was wounded. This defeat was painful, yet it carried lessons. Discipline, obedience, and patience were essential for victory. It also reminded the community that faith must endure even in hardship. The Battle of the Trench, 627 CE. 2 years later, the Quraysh, joined by other tribes, assembled a massive coalition of 10,000 men to besiege Medina. Outnumbered and facing destruction, the Muslims adopted an innovative strategy. On the advice of Salman the Persian, they dug a wide trench around the city, a tactic unfamiliar in Arabia. The trench made direct assault impossible. The siege dragged on, morale collapsed among the attackers, and eventually the coalition dispersed. This event was decisive. Medina remained intact, and the Quraysh realized they could no longer easily crush Muhammad's community. The tide had begun to turn. The Prophet as leader and diplomat. Through these conflicts, Muhammad showed not only courage but also adaptability. At Badr, he inspired confidence against overwhelming odds. At Uhud, he accepted the setback as a lesson rather than despair. At the trench, he embraced new tactics, uniting diverse groups to defend Medina. He was not just a military commander. He was a leader who combined faith with practical wisdom. The impact of conflict on the Ummah. These battles reshaped the community. Unity, shared trials bound Muslims closer together. Legitimacy, victories and endurance won respect from surrounding tribes. Faith, revelations during these times emphasized patience, trust in God, and moral conduct in war. For the young Ummah, the conflicts were not only survival, they were crucibles in which their identity was forged. Reflection, struggle and strength. The years of conflict with Mecca tested Muhammad and his followers to the core. They faced hunger, wounds, and grief, yet they endured. Each battle, victory or defeat, deepened their conviction and refined their community. It was through these struggles that Islam began to move from fragile beginnings to a position of strength. Closing scene for sleep. As you drift into rest, imagine the desert wind sweeping across the valley of Badr, the slopes of Uhud, and the trenches of Medina. Picture the small band of believers, weary but steadfast, facing armies far larger than themselves. At their center stands Muhammad, calm and resolute, teaching through victory and through loss that true strength lies not in numbers, but in faith, unity, and patience. Part 11, Relations with Jews, Christians, and Other Tribes. Introduction, a diverse society in Medina. Medina was not a city of Muslims alone. When Muhammad and his followers arrived after the Hijra, they entered a place filled with diversity. Arab tribes like the Aws and Khazraj shared the city with several Jewish tribes, while Christian communities lived nearby in Arabia's northern regions. Pagan traditions still lingered, and tribal alliances shifted constantly. To lead Medina, Muhammad needed more than spiritual authority, he needed diplomacy, fairness, and vision to unify a fractured society. The Constitution of Medina. Soon after arriving, Muhammad drafted the Constitution of Medina. This was a groundbreaking social contract. It recognized Muslims, Jews, and other groups as one political community, Ummah, bound together for mutual defense. Each group retained religious freedom, practicing their faith without interference. Justice and protection extended to all, regardless of tribe or belief. Conflicts would be referred to Muhammad for arbitration, ensuring fairness above tribal bias. This was a radical departure from Arabian norms. For the first time, loyalty was not only to tribe, but to a shared civic order. Relations with Jewish tribes. 3 prominent Jewish tribes lived in Medina, the Banu Qaynuqa, Banu Nadir, and Banu Qurayza. At first, relations were cooperative. Jews shared monotheistic beliefs, scripture, and moral traditions. However, tensions arose. Religious differences, some Jewish leaders disputed Muhammad's prophethood, pointing to differences with the Torah. Political loyalties, alliances during times of conflict strained trust. Incidents of conflict, when certain tribes broke terms of the constitution, allying with Mecca or threatening Medina's security, Muhammad responded decisively, sometimes with exile or, in extreme cases, execution. These episodes reflected the fragile balance between coexistence and survival in a city under constant threat from Mecca. Relations with Christians. Muhammad's contact with Christians was less frequent in Medina but still significant. Delegations from Najran visited to discuss theology, and the Quran revealed verses acknowledging Jesus and Mary while affirming Islam's distinct message of monotheism. Muhammad's stance toward Christians was generally respectful. He emphasized that they, like Jews, were people of the book, sharing in the Abrahamic tradition. Treaties offered Christians protection in exchange for loyalty, laying a foundation for coexistence. Tribal diplomacy beyond Medina. Beyond the city, Muhammad forged alliances with neutral tribes to secure trade routes and expand Islam's influence. Diplomacy was essential, as Medina could not survive in isolation. These alliances showed Muhammad's pragmatism. Peace was preferable, but he was prepared for conflict if agreements were broken. Quranic guidance on interfaith relations. During this period, revelations addressed relations with other faiths. Calls for respect and dialogue with Jews and Christians. Warnings against betrayal of treaties. Affirmations that ultimate guidance comes from God, but that coexistence is a duty. The Quran's balanced tone reflected the reality of Medina. Cooperation was possible, but loyalty and justice were non-negotiable. Muhammad's role as arbiter. Muhammad's role in Medina went beyond prophet, he became judge and statesman. When disputes arose between Muslims, Jews, or pagans, he was expected to rule fairly. His reputation as al-Amin extended into this new role, and his judgments emphasized equality, even when decisions were unpopular. Legacy of interfaith encounters. The years in Medina established patterns that echoed throughout Islamic civilization. Respect for people of the book, as part of the broader monotheistic family. Treaties and protections for religious minorities under Islamic governance. Firm responses to betrayal, balanced with mercy and dialogue. These encounters showed Islam's ability to exist within pluralism, while also asserting its distinct identity. Reflection, faith and diplomacy intertwined. Muhammad's leadership in Medina was not only spiritual but political and diplomatic. He built a society where Muslims, Jews, Christians, and pagans could live side by side under a common charter. Yet he also navigated the challenges of betrayal, conflict, and shifting loyalties with both firmness and justice. His example set the stage for centuries of Islamic governance, where coexistence and conflict alike would continue to shape history. Closing scene for sleep. As you drift into rest, imagine Medina in the glow of evening lanterns. Muslims gather in the mosque for prayer, Jewish families study their scriptures, Christians recall the stories of Jesus, and tribal elders discuss alliances. At the center of it all is Muhammad, calm and steady, weaving together the threads of a diverse society into a single tapestry of community, justice, and faith. Part 12, The Treaty of Hudaybiyyah. Introduction, a truce against all odds. By the 6th year after the Hijra, 628 CE, Muhammad and his followers had established themselves in Medina as a growing political and spiritual force. Yet the Kaaba in Mecca, Islam's holiest site, remained out of reach. The Muslims longed to return, not for war, but for pilgrimage. This longing set the stage for one of the most surprising and significant events of Muhammad's life, the Treaty of Hudaybiyyah, a peace agreement with the Quraysh that reshaped Arabia's balance of power. The desire for pilgrimage. For Arabs, pilgrimage to the Kaaba was a sacred tradition predating Islam. Despite exile, Muslims felt deeply connected to Mecca. Muhammad announced that they would perform the Umrah, a lesser pilgrimage, unarmed, with only simple provisions. Over 1,000 Muslims joined him, traveling peacefully with animals for sacrifice, dressed in the garments of pilgrims. This was not a march to battle but a declaration of faith. They sought only to worship. The Quraysh response. The Quraysh, however, panicked. They feared that allowing Muhammad into Mecca would legitimize his movement. Armed forces were dispatched to block the Muslims. Undeterred, Muhammad halted at a place called Hudaybiyyah, just outside Mecca. There, negotiations began. Envoys moved between camps, the atmosphere tense. The negotiations. The Quraysh wanted to demonstrate strength, yet they also recognized Muhammad's growing influence. After days of talks, an agreement emerged, though its terms seemed unfavorable to the Muslims. The Muslims would not perform Umrah that year, but could return the next year. A 10-year truce would be established between Quraysh and Muslims. Any Meccan who joined the Muslims without guardian approval had to be returned, but Muslims defecting to Mecca would not be returned. Tribes could ally with either side, solidifying broader networks. Some followers were dismayed. Was this humiliation, to turn back from the Kaaba and accept such unequal terms? Yet Muhammad signed the treaty, recognizing its long-term wisdom. The oath under the tree. During negotiations, a rumor spread that Uthman, one of Muhammad's envoys, had been killed by Quraysh. In response, the Muslims pledged unwavering loyalty under a tree, an event remembered as the Pledge of Ridwan. Their willingness to defend Muhammad strengthened their unity, and later Quranic verses praised their faithfulness. When Uthman returned alive, the oath still stood as a sign of solidarity and resolve. The wisdom of peace. Though the treaty looked like a setback, it proved a masterstroke. Legitimacy. For the first time, Quraysh formally recognized Muhammad as a political equal. Stability. With 10 years of truce, Islam could spread through dialogue rather than constant war. Expansion. Tribes allied freely, and many entered Islam in these peaceful years. Within 2 years, more people embraced Islam than in all the previous years combined. The truce opened hearts in ways battle never could. Testing the treaty. Soon after, tribes allied to each side clashed, testing the treaty's limits. Quraysh's violations gave Muhammad grounds for future action, showing the fragile nature of peace in Arabia. Yet even when terms seemed unfair, Muhammad insisted on honoring the treaty, reinforcing Islam's commitment to justice and reliability in agreements. Quranic reflections. Revelations at this time framed the treaty not as defeat but as victory. Indeed, We have given you a clear triumph, Quran 48:1. Victory was not always measured in battle, it could also be found in patience, restraint, and diplomacy. Legacy of Hudaybiyyah. The Treaty of Hudaybiyyah was a turning point. It showed that Muhammad's leadership extended beyond battlefield courage to strategic foresight. It taught the Ummah that restraint can be more powerful than aggression, and that peace can win more converts than war. Reflection: the strength of restraint. In Hudaybiyyah, Muhammad demonstrated that true strength is not only in striking blows but in knowing when to stay the hand. His followers learned that humiliation in the short term could mean triumph in the long run, and that peace, even fragile, was a tool of transformation. Closing scene for sleep. As you drift into rest, imagine the desert camp at Hudaybiyyah. Pilgrims in white robes wait anxiously, their animals tethered, their hearts yearning for the Kaaba just beyond reach. The Quraysh negotiators arrive, words clash, and terms are signed. The Muslims turn back, disappointed, yet Muhammad's calm face carries assurance: this, too, is victory. In the silence of the night, the seeds of peace quietly begin to grow. Part 13, The Conquest of Mecca. Introduction: Return to the Sacred City. 8 years after the Hijra, the balance of power in Arabia had shifted dramatically. The Muslims in Medina, once a persecuted minority, had grown into a formidable community with alliances, victories, and moral authority. The Quraysh of Mecca, once dominant, now found themselves weakened and isolated. What followed was one of the most remarkable episodes in Muhammad's life, the Conquest of Mecca. It was not only a military success but also a triumph of mercy, forgiveness, and transformation. Breaking of the treaty. The Treaty of Hudaybiyyah had brought peace, but it was fragile. When allies of the Quraysh violated the agreement by attacking a tribe allied with the Muslims, the treaty was broken. Muhammad now had grounds to act. Yet he did not rush into battle. Instead, he carefully prepared, assembling a force large enough to ensure victory with minimal bloodshed. The march toward Mecca. In 630 CE, Muhammad advanced toward Mecca with an army of 10,000. The sheer size of the force signaled that resistance was futile. Along the way, tribes joined willingly, recognizing the inevitability of Islam's rise. As the Muslims approached Mecca, the Quraysh realized they could not win. Panic spread in the city, but Muhammad declared that those who sought refuge in the Kaaba, stayed in their homes, or entered the house of Abu Sufyan, a Quraysh leader, would be safe. His aim was not destruction, but reconciliation. Entry into Mecca. The Muslims entered Mecca with minimal resistance. There was no mass slaughter, no vengeful retribution. Instead, Muhammad rode humbly on his camel, head bowed, in gratitude to God. He declared a general amnesty. Those who had once persecuted him, who had driven him from his home, and who had fought against him, were forgiven. This act of mercy stunned the Quraysh. Leaders who had been Muhammad's fiercest enemies, including Abu Sufyan, accepted Islam. The conquest was not a triumph of the sword but of the heart. Cleansing the Kaaba. Muhammad entered the Kaaba, the sacred sanctuary of Abraham that had been filled with idols. With his companions, he removed and destroyed the idols, restoring the Kaaba to the worship of the one God. He recited verses of the Quran: "Truth has come, and falsehood has vanished. Indeed, falsehood is bound to vanish." This moment symbolized the transformation of Mecca, from a city of idol worship to the spiritual center of Islam. Reconciliation and forgiveness. Perhaps the most remarkable aspect of the conquest was Muhammad's approach to former enemies. Instead of vengeance, he chose forgiveness. People like Hind bint Utbah, who had desecrated the body of Muhammad's uncle Hamza, were pardoned after embracing Islam. This clemency won hearts, turning foes into allies. Mecca as the center of Islam. The conquest solidified Mecca as the heart of the Muslim world. From this moment, the Kaaba became the focal point of Muslim worship, with prayers directed toward it and the pilgrimage established as a pillar of the faith. Impact of the conquest. the conquest of Mecca was a turning point. Religious transformation, the Kaaba was rededicated to monotheism. Political shift, the Quraysh, once bitter opponents, became part of Islam's expansion. Moral example, Muhammad's mercy became a model for leadership, showing that true victory lies in forgiveness. Reflection, triumph through mercy. The conquest of Mecca was not merely a political event, it was a moral and spiritual statement. Muhammad proved that power could be exercised with humility, and that mercy could achieve what violence never could. His forgiveness of enemies turned Mecca into the beating heart of a new civilization. Closing scene for sleep. As you close your eyes, picture the Kaaba, cleansed of idols, standing pure beneath the desert sky. Pilgrims circle it in reverence, their voices lifted in prayer. Muhammad, once driven from the city, now returns not with vengeance but with compassion. Mecca, the city of his birth, becomes the city of peace, and its transformation echoes across history. Part 14, Muhammad's Final Years. Introduction, the closing chapter. By the year 630 CE, Muhammad had returned to Mecca in peace, cleansed the Kaaba of idols, and secured the city as the spiritual center of Islam. Yet his mission was not complete. The last 2 years of his life were a time of consolidation, reflection, and teaching. These years saw Islam spread across Arabia, the farewell pilgrimage, and his final sermon, a message that echoed across generations. In this chapter, we follow the Prophet's final steps, as he prepared his community to continue the mission without him. Islam's expansion across Arabia. After the conquest of Mecca, tribes across Arabia embraced Islam in large numbers. Some did so out of conviction, others through political pragmatism, but all recognized that Muhammad's movement was now the unifying force of the peninsula. Delegations from distant tribes traveled to Medina in what came to be called the Year of Delegations, 631 CE. These emissaries pledged allegiance, sought guidance, and returned home to spread the message. Islam had moved from a local movement to a national reality. Consolidation of faith and practice. During these years, revelations focused on refining laws and practices that would define Islam. Prayer, fasting, and charity were firmly established as pillars of daily life. The Hajj was restored as a pure monotheistic pilgrimage, free of pre-Islamic rituals. Social justice was reinforced, with reminders of fairness in trade, care for the poor, and protection for the vulnerable. Muhammad's role shifted from a leader in constant struggle to a teacher and guide, ensuring his followers understood how to live their faith in peace. The farewell pilgrimage, 632 CE. In the final year of his life, Muhammad performed the Hajj, the only full pilgrimage of his prophetic mission. Over 100,000 Muslims joined him, gathering at the Kaaba and the plain of Arafat. The rituals of Hajj were re-established as Abrahamic practices, circling the Kaaba, standing at Arafat, stoning the pillars at Mina. These acts became a model for Muslims for all time. The pilgrimage symbolized Islam's unity, bringing together people of every tribe and region under one God. The farewell sermon. On the plain of Arafat, Muhammad delivered his most famous address, later known as the farewell sermon. Its themes were timeless. Equality, all mankind is from Adam and Eve. An Arab has no superiority over a non-Arab, nor does a non-Arab have superiority over an Arab. Rights and justice, he emphasized the sanctity of life, property, and honor. Women's dignity, he urged kindness toward women, reminding men of their responsibilities. Faithfulness to Scripture, he reminded Muslims to hold fast to the Quran and his teachings. The sermon was both a summary of his mission and a blueprint for the community's future. The Prophet's final illness. Soon after returning to Medina, Muhammad fell ill. His condition worsened over several days. Even in weakness, he continued to lead prayers when possible, and when unable, he appointed Abu Bakr to lead in his place, a gesture that hinted at future leadership. He spent his last moments in the apartment of his wife Aisha, resting his head in her lap. On June 8, 632 CE, at the age of 63, he passed away. the community's grief. The news of his death shook the Muslim community to its core. Many could not believe it. Umar ibn al-Khattab, overcome with grief, declared that Muhammad had not died. It was Abu Bakr who calmed the people, reciting from the Quran, "Muhammad is but a messenger, messengers have passed away before him. Will you then turn back on your heels if he dies or is slain?" Quran 3:144. These words reminded the believers that while the Prophet had died, his message and mission would endure. Legacy of his final years. The Prophet's last years cemented Islam as both faith and community. His farewell pilgrimage demonstrated unity, his sermon outlined principles of justice, and his leadership ensured that the Ummah was prepared to carry on without him. His passing marked the end of revelation but the beginning of a global legacy. Reflection, the sunset of a life, the dawn of a civilization. Muhammad's final years were not about conquest or conflict, but about guidance and preparation. He had carried his mission from the solitude of a cave to the unity of an entire people. His life ended humbly, in the home of his wife, but his legacy stretched far beyond Arabia. Closing scene for sleep. As you rest, picture the plain of Arafat under the wide desert sky, filled with pilgrims gathered in unity, listening to the Prophet's words of justice, equality, and faith. Then imagine Medina, quiet and grieving, as the men who had guided them for 2 decades returned to his Lord. His mission complete, his legacy began, a light carried forward by his followers, a light that would never fade. Part 15, The Prophet as a Lawgiver and Moral Teacher. Introduction, From Messenger to Guide of Society. Muhammad was not only a prophet who conveyed divine revelation, he was also a lawgiver and a moral teacher who reshaped how people lived together. His teachings addressed not just worship, but also commerce, justice, family life, and governance. In Medina, he became the central authority for disputes and ethical questions, drawing on both revelation and wisdom. Over time, his words and actions provided the foundations for Islamic law, Sharia, and a moral code that still guides millions today. Justice as a core principle. At the heart of Muhammad's teachings was the principle of justice, ADL. He emphasized fairness even when it went against personal or tribal interest. Verses of the Quran revealed during his leadership commanded believers to stand firm for truth, even if it meant ruling against their own families. Muhammad often reminded people that accountability before God was greater than worldly gain, making honesty and fairness non-negotiable virtues. Commerce and fair dealing. As a former merchant, Muhammad understood the importance of trust in trade. He forbade dishonest practices like false weights, hidden defects in goods, or exploitative contracts. In Medina's markets, he personally monitored transactions, reminding traders that cheating was a sin. Business, under his guidance, was no longer just a worldly pursuit, it became an act of worship when conducted with integrity. Care for the vulnerable. Muhammad's moral vision centered on protecting society's most vulnerable. Orphans. Having been an orphan himself, he repeatedly emphasized their rights, warning that mistreating or neglecting them would bring God's anger. Women. He improved women's position by granting inheritance rights, condemning practices like female infanticide, and urging kindness in marriage. The poor. He institutionalized charity, zakat, as a communal duty, ensuring that wealth was redistributed to help those in need. His teaching turned compassion into law, making care for the weak a central obligation of faith. Family and social ethics. Muhammad's guidance extended deeply into family life. Marriage was framed as a partnership of kindness and respect. Parents were commanded to treat children with mercy and fairness. Neighbors were to be honored, regardless of their religion. By intertwining faith with daily interactions, he created a moral fabric that extended into every corner of society. Law and dispute resolution. In Medina, Muhammad was frequently asked to arbitrate disputes. He judged cases involving property, inheritance, and tribal conflicts, often applying Quranic principles of equity and fairness. His judgments were noted for their balance, firm when justice demanded it, yet merciful when possible. For example, when punishments were carried out, he reminded followers to temper justice with compassion, never exceeding the limits set by God. This balance of law and mercy became a hallmark of Islamic governance. The Quran and Sunnah as sources of guidance. Muhammad's role as lawgiver was not independent, he conveyed revelation. The Quran provided divine principles, while his sayings and actions, Sunnah, offered practical application. Together, these two sources became the foundation of Sharia, shaping everything from worship to commerce to criminal justice. Moral character as law. For Muhammad, law was inseparable from morality. He taught that true piety was not ritual alone, but honesty, kindness, humility, and self-restraint. His own life modeled these values. He was known for forgiveness, generosity, and consistency between word and action. His moral example became as binding as his legal rulings. Lasting influence on civilization. Muhammad's work as lawgiver and moral teacher outlasted his lifetime. Islamic law developed from his foundations, influencing societies across continents. His moral teachings shaped literature, philosophy, and daily life. His example provided a framework not only for Muslims but for interfaith relations, governance, and trade. For centuries, scholars would return to his words and actions to resolve new challenges, keeping his guidance alive in changing contexts. Reflection: the Prophet as model of justice and mercy. Muhammad's role as lawgiver was not about imposing rules for their own sake, but about creating a society rooted in justice, compassion, and accountability to God. He turned morality into a lived reality, where caring for orphans, conducting honest trade, and showing mercy to others were as important as prayer and fasting. Closing scene for sleep. As you rest, picture Medina's marketplace at dusk. Merchants close their stalls, children run home, and neighbors greet each other warmly. At the heart of it all sits Muhammad, listening patiently to disputes, offering wisdom that blends fairness with mercy. His words echo into the evening air, reminders that justice, compassion, and honesty are the truest signs of faith. Part 16: The Prophet's Family and Companions. Introduction: the circle closest to him. While Muhammad's life and mission touched an entire civilization, those closest to him, his family and companions, carried a special weight in shaping Islam's early years. They were his confidants, protectors, students, and successors. Their loyalty and sacrifices ensured that his teachings endured beyond his lifetime. To understand the Prophet's legacy, we must look at this circle: his wives, children, and companions who became the first generation of Muslims. Khadija, the first believer. Khadija, Muhammad's first wife, was his pillar of support in the earliest days. A successful merchant, she believed in his honesty long before his prophetic call, and when revelation came, she was the first to affirm his truth. Her wealth sustained the community, and her faith sustained Muhammad himself. For 25 years, their marriage was a partnership of loyalty and affection. Her passing during the year of sorrow left a wound that never truly healed. Aisha, the scholar and teacher. After Khadija's death, Muhammad married Aisha, the daughter of Abu Bakr. Known for her sharp intellect and memory, Aisha became one of the most influential transmitters of hadith, the sayings and actions of the Prophet. She lived long after his death, guiding the Muslim community with her knowledge. Her presence showed that women were not just bystanders in Islam's early history, but teachers and leaders. Fatima, daughter and legacy. Among Muhammad's children, Fatima held a special place. Married to Ali ibn Abi Talib, she became mother to Hassan and Hussein, who would later be central figures in Islamic history. Fatima was known for her piety, simplicity, and closeness to her father, who described her as a part of me. Through her, the Prophet's lineage continued, and her descendants are revered across the Muslim world. The companions, Sahaba. The companions of Muhammad formed the backbone of the early Ummah. They were men and women of varied backgrounds, wealthy merchants, poor laborers, freed slaves, tribal leaders, and humble villagers. Their devotion helped Islam survive its fragile beginnings. Abu Bakr, Muhammad's closest friend and the first adult male to accept Islam. Known for his generosity, he freed persecuted slaves like Bilal. After Muhammad's death, he became the first caliph, guiding the community through crisis. Umar ibn al-Khattab, initially an opponent of Islam, Umar embraced the faith and became one of its strongest defenders. His leadership was marked by justice and firmness, and he would later serve as the second caliph. Uthman ibn Affan, a wealthy merchant, Uthman financed much of the Muslim cause. As caliph, he compiled the Quran into a single, standardized text. Ali ibn Abi Talib, Muhammad's cousin and son-in-law, Ali was known for his bravery, knowledge, and closeness to the Prophet. His leadership, later as caliph, shaped much of Islamic thought and history. Bilal ibn Rabah, once enslaved, Bilal became the first muezzin, caller to prayer, his voice ringing out as a symbol of Islam's commitment to equality. The women companions. Women were also central in shaping early Islam. Sumayya bint Khayyat, the first martyr, killed for refusing to renounce her faith. Salamah, a wise companion who gave Muhammad advice and narrated many hadith. Nusayba bint Kabi, Amra, a woman who fought courageously in battles alongside the men. These women remind us that the Ummah's foundation was built by sacrifices shared by both genders. Bonds of loyalty and love. The companions were not perfect, and disputes often arose, but their love for Muhammad united them. They preserved his words, followed his example, and carried Islam beyond Arabia after his death. Their efforts turned a fragile movement into a global civilization. Reflection, the torchbearers of his legacy. The Prophet's family and companions were more than witnesses, they were participants who lived the message. Their loyalty, scholarship, and sacrifices ensured that Muhammad's teachings were not lost but carried across generations. They became examples for future Muslims, embodying the values of faith, courage, and compassion. Closing scene for sleep. As you drift into rest, imagine Medina at night, its streets quiet after a day of prayer and teaching. In one home, Fatima tends to her children, in another, Aisha shares her knowledge with eager students. In the mosque, companions gather to recall the Prophet's words. The circle closest to him continues his mission, carrying the light of his message into the world beyond. Part 17, The Expansion of Islam after Muhammad. Introduction, A Mission Beyond One Lifetime. When the Prophet Muhammad passed away in 632 CE, the Muslim community was struck with grief. For over 2 decades, they had relied on him as their guide, leader, and teacher. His death left a void, but also a legacy. His companions, the Sahaba, now carried the weight of continuing his mission. What followed was a remarkable era of expansion and consolidation, as Islam spread beyond Arabia and the community learned to navigate life without the physical presence of their prophet. The leadership of Abu Bakr. After Muhammad's death, Abu Bakr was chosen as the first caliph, successor. His first task was to stabilize the Ummah. Some tribes in Arabia refused to pay the obligatory charity, zakat, or rebelled outright. These were the Ridda Wars, a test of unity. Abu Bakr responded firmly, declaring that loyalty to Islam meant loyalty to its duties, not just political allegiance. His leadership preserved the integrity of the faith and ensured that Islam did not fracture after the Prophet's death. Preservation of the Quran. One of Abu Bakr's most significant acts was commissioning the compilation of the Quran into a single written text. During battles, many of those who had memorized the Quran were killed, raising fears that portions might be lost. Abu Bakr, with Umar's advice and Zayd ibn Thabit's scholarship, ensured the revelations were gathered and preserved. This act guaranteed that the Prophet's message would endure unchanged. The leadership of Umar ibn al-Khattab. After Abu Bakr's passing, Umar became the second caliph. Under his leadership, Islam expanded rapidly beyond Arabia, reaching into the Byzantine and Persian empires. Victories at battles like Yarmouk and Qadisiyah opened vast new lands. Umar was not only a conqueror but also an administrator. He introduced systems of taxation, justice, and welfare. He established new cities, including Kufa and Basra, as centers of governance. His justice was legendary, earning him the title Al-Faruq, the one who distinguishes truth from falsehood. Uthman and the standardization of the Quran. The third caliph, Uthman ibn Affan, faced the challenge of a growing empire. As Islam spread to diverse regions, variations in Quranic recitation appeared. To preserve unity, Uthman ordered the Quran to be standardized in a single dialect and distributed copies across the empire. His leadership also oversaw continued expansion into North Africa and Central Asia, but political unrest grew, eventually leading to his assassination, a reminder of the human struggles even within a divinely inspired community. Ali ibn Abi Talib and internal struggles. Ali, the Prophet's cousin and son-in-law, became the fourth caliph. His era was marked by internal conflict, including the first civil war, fitna, among Muslims. Battles like Siffin and the tragedy of Karbala, later under his son Hussein, revealed the deep fissures emerging within the Ummah. Despite turmoil, Ali's reputation for wisdom, bravery, and piety remained unmatched. His sayings and teachings became sources of inspiration for centuries. The spirit of expansion. Under these early leaders, Islam's message spread with astonishing speed. Within a generation of the Prophet's death, Islam had reached Egypt, Syria, Iraq, Persia, and beyond. Yet this expansion was not only military. It was also cultural and spiritual, as local populations encountered the Quran's teachings and the example of Muslim governance. Continuity of Muhammad's teachings. The companions carried the Prophet's example everywhere they went. In governance, they ruled with justice and humility, echoing Muhammad's teachings. In scholarship, they narrated hadith, ensuring his sayings and actions were preserved. In community, they modeled his compassion, generosity, and sense of accountability. Through them, Muhammad's influence stretched far beyond Medina, shaping entire civilizations. Reflection, the torch passed on. The expansion of Islam after Muhammad's death was not the work of armies alone. It was the work of his companions, men and women who had lived by his side, absorbed his teachings, and carried them outward. The Prophet's mission was not confined to his lifetime, it was a light that his followers spread across the known world. Closing scene for sleep. As you drift into rest, picture the Arabian Peninsula after the Prophet's death. A grieving community steadies itself under Abu Bakr's leadership. Armies march across deserts, carrying not only swords but words of revelation. In Medina, scribes carefully write down verses of the Quran. The Prophet is gone, but his presence remains in every act of justice, every prayer, and every word recited from the book he conveyed. Part 18, Muhammad in Comparative Perspective. Introduction, the Prophet among Prophets and Leaders. The life of Muhammad has often been studied not in isolation, but in comparison with other great figures of history, religious, political, and cultural. He is seen alongside Abraham, Moses, Jesus, and other prophets of monotheism, but also alongside statesmen, reformers, and visionaries who shaped civilizations. To appreciate his impact fully, we must place him in this broader perspective, understanding how his message both aligned with and diverged from other traditions. Muhammad and the Abrahamic lineage. Muhammad consistently presented his mission as part of a larger chain of prophecy stretching back to Abraham. Like Abraham, he emphasized monotheism, the worship of one God. Like Moses, he was a lawgiver, guiding his people through both revelation and practical governance. Like Jesus, he spoke of mercy, compassion, and the inner life of the heart. Yet Muhammad's mission was also distinct. Where earlier prophets addressed specific communities, Muhammad's message claimed universality, extending beyond tribe, ethnicity, or region. Continuities with Judaism. Islam shares deep roots with Judaism, the oneness of God, dietary laws, emphasis on justice, and reverence for prophets like Moses and David. Early in Medina, Muslims prayed toward Jerusalem, showing continuity with Jewish tradition, before turning toward Mecca. However, Muhammad's message differed by emphasizing the finality of his own prophethood, positioning Islam as both a continuation and completion of earlier revelations. This distinction shaped his interactions with Jewish communities in Medina, sometimes cooperative, sometimes tense. Continuities with Christianity. With Christianity, Islam shared reverence for Jesus and Mary, emphasis on love, forgiveness, and moral purity. The Quran described Jesus as a prophet and miracle worker, born of the Virgin Mary. Yet it rejected Christian doctrines of divinity and crucifixion, affirming instead strict monotheism. Muhammad's life offered a contrast to Jesus in role. While Jesus' mission was primarily spiritual and sacrificial, Muhammad's combined spiritual teaching with political and legal leadership. Together, they reflected different dimensions of divine guidance. Comparison with other leaders. Outside the Abrahamic faiths, Muhammad can also be compared to figures like the Buddha or Confucius, who reshaped societies through moral and philosophical vision. Like them, he created not only a religion but a way of life, offering guidance on family, community, and ethics. Unlike many reformers, however, Muhammad combined spiritual authority with direct political leadership. He was simultaneously prophet, statesman, judge, and general, a rare integration of roles. Muhammad as lawgiver. Historians often place Muhammad alongside Moses, Hammurabi, and other lawgivers who established enduring codes. The Quran, together with Muhammad's example, became a framework that guided not just rituals but commerce, justice, and governance. Unlike secular codes, however, his law was intertwined with faith, making obedience both a legal and spiritual duty. Muhammad as unifier. Where many leaders united their people through conquest alone, Muhammad united Arabs through both faith and moral reform. Tribal loyalty gave way to religious community, transforming Arabia from fragmented clans into a collective civilization. His role as unifier is often compared with figures like Charlemagne in Europe, though Muhammad's unification rested on revelation as much as on politics. Western and Eastern perspectives. In Western history, Muhammad has been viewed with both admiration and suspicion. Medieval Europe often misunderstood him, seeing him through the lens of rivalry with Islam. Yet in modern times, scholars like Thomas Carlyle praised him as a man of sincerity and genius, while others studied him as a revolutionary leader. In the East, particularly in South Asia and Africa, Muhammad's example inspired reform movements, anti-colonial struggles, and cultural renaissances. He became not only a prophet but also a symbol of dignity and resistance. Muhammad's legacy in world history. Placing Muhammad in comparative perspective reveals why his influence is so enduring. Like Moses, he delivered law. Like Jesus, he preached compassion. Like Abraham, he called for faith in one God. Like great rulers, he united people into a lasting civilization. Yet he was unique in combining all of these roles in one life. Reflection, a prophet among humanity. Muhammad's life invites both faith and historical analysis. Believers see him as the seal of the prophets, completing a divine chain. Historians see him as one of the most impactful figures in human history. Both perspectives agree, his life cannot be understood without comparison, yet it cannot be equaled. Closing scene for sleep. As you drift into rest, imagine a great hall of history, where figures from across ages stand together, Abraham with his devotion, Moses with his law, Jesus with his compassion, and Muhammad with his balance of faith, justice, and leadership. Each played their part, but Muhammad, in his humility and strength, carried a mission that embraced them all. His presence shines as a bridge between past and future, between heaven and earth. Part 19, The Prophet's Global Legacy. Introduction, a legacy beyond Arabia. When Muhammad passed away in 632 CE, his mission was rooted in Arabia. Yet within decades, his teachings had crossed deserts, mountains, and seas. They influenced empires, inspired civilizations, and shaped cultures far beyond the land of his birth. His global legacy is not confined to religion alone, it spans law, art, philosophy, governance, and daily life. To understand the Prophet's enduring impact, we must look at how his example and message echoed across the centuries and around the world. Islam as a civilization. The message Muhammad conveyed blossomed into one of the world's great civilizations. From Spain in the west to India in the east, Islamic societies flourished for centuries, connected by shared values. Law, Sharia, derived from Quran and Sunnah, became a moral and legal framework. Knowledge, scholars preserved Greek, Roman, and Persian texts, while advancing mathematics, medicine, and astronomy. Art, Islamic architecture, calligraphy, and design reflected reverence for beauty and spirituality. Trade, the Prophet's example of honesty in commerce guided global networks of exchange. At the heart of it all was Muhammad's model, faithful, just, and compassionate. Influence on law and governance. Muhammad's role as lawgiver and statesman provided a blueprint for governance. His constitution of Medina became an early example of pluralism and social contract. Caliphs and rulers across centuries drew from his teachings to establish justice, welfare systems, and courts. Even outside Muslim lands, thinkers studied his methods. European scholars in the Middle Ages debated his laws, while Enlightenment philosophers looked to Islamic governance for ideas of tolerance and civic responsibility. The spread of faith. Missionaries, traders, and scholars carried Muhammad's message far beyond Arabia. Islam reached West Africa through caravans, Indonesia through maritime trade, and Europe through both diplomacy and conflict. In each region, Muhammad's legacy adapted to local culture while maintaining its core principles of monotheism, justice, and compassion. Muhammad as a model of character. For Muslims across centuries, Muhammad's personal example, his humility, honesty, and mercy, was as important as his revelations. His life became the standard for moral behavior, guiding everything from family life to leadership. Collections of his sayings, hadith, and biographies, Sirah, became manuals for living a righteous life. This model inspired not only scholars and rulers but ordinary people, who saw in his life a reflection of their own struggles and hopes. Legacy in interfaith relations. Muhammad's recognition of Jews and Christians as people of the book shaped centuries of coexistence. While conflicts did occur, his treaties and protections established precedents for religious pluralism. His interactions with Christians in Najran and his agreements with Jewish tribes of Medina became reference points for later rulers. This interfaith legacy resonates even today, as dialogues between religions often invoke his example of respectful engagement. Cultural and intellectual impact. The Prophet's encouragement of learning, captured in sayings like, "Seeking knowledge is an obligation upon every Muslim," fueled a tradition of scholarship. From Baghdad's House of Wisdom to Cordoba's libraries, Islamic civilization became a beacon of knowledge. Medicine, philosophy, algebra, optics, and geography advanced under the conviction that seeking knowledge was a form of worship. In this way, Muhammad's emphasis on reflection and learning shaped not only Islamic societies but also the global intellectual heritage. Muhammad's legacy today. 14 centuries later, Muhammad's legacy remains vivid. For believers, he is the final prophet, the model of perfect character, and the conveyor of divine revelation. For historians, he is one of the most influential figures in human history, whose leadership transformed Arabia and set in motion vast cultural change. For the world, his teachings on justice, mercy, and community continue to inspire people across cultures and faiths. Reflection, a light for all nations. Muhammad's global legacy demonstrates how one life, rooted in faith and humility, can shape the destiny of millions. His influence outlived empires, crossed languages and continents, and continues to resonate. Whether in the prayers of believers, the writings of scholars, or the moral teachings of communities, his presence endures as both historical reality and spiritual light. Closing scene for sleep. As you drift into rest, imagine a map of the world unfolding across centuries. From the deserts of Arabia, light spreads outward, to Damascus and Baghdad, Cairo and Cordoba, Timbuktu and Delhi, reaching faraway islands and distant continents. At its source is a man who began with quiet reflection in a cave, whose words and example continue to echo in the lives of billions. Part 20: The Prophet's Enduring Relevance. Introduction. 14 centuries later. More than 1,400 years have passed since the Prophet Muhammad walked the streets of Mecca and Medina, yet his influence remains alive in the modern world. Billions look to his example daily for guidance in prayer, ethics, family life, and governance. His story continues to inspire hope, resilience, and reform in societies across continents. This final part reflects on why his life is still so relevant today, exploring not only religious devotion but also cultural, political, and ethical resonance. Muhammad as a model of character. One of the enduring reasons for his relevance lies in his character. The Quran describes him as a mercy to the worlds. His honesty, patience, humility, and forgiveness continue to resonate with believers who strive to emulate these traits. Modern Muslims look to his example in moments of challenge. His patience under persecution offers inspiration to communities facing oppression. His humility in leadership reminds political and business leaders that service is greater than power. His mercy toward enemies shows that forgiveness can heal where vengeance cannot. Character, as much as doctrine, makes Muhammad timeless. Teachings on social justice. Muhammad's insistence on justice and equality still speaks powerfully in today's world. His condemnation of corruption, exploitation, and neglect of the poor provides a moral framework that transcends centuries. Modern movements for human dignity, whether against poverty, racism, or inequality, often find resonance in his teachings. The farewell sermon's emphasis on human equality regardless of race or ethnicity remains strikingly relevant in societies struggling with discrimination and division. Guidance for daily life. For Muslims, Muhammad's relevance is not confined to sermons or history books. His Sunnah, the record of his sayings and actions, offers guidance for everyday matters. How to pray and show gratitude. How to conduct business fairly. How to treat family members with respect. How to approach conflict with patience and wisdom. This integration of spirituality and daily practice explains why his influence endures so strongly in the rhythm of believers' lives. Influence on global interactions. Muhammad's legacy continues to shape international relations. His model of treaties, like the Constitution of Medina and the Treaty of Hudaybiyyah, is studied for lessons in pluralism, diplomacy, and conflict resolution. His recognition of Jews and Christians as people of the book provides a basis for interfaith dialogue today. In an age of globalization, his emphasis on community, Ummah, resonates not only within Islam but also with broader calls for unity beyond national or tribal lines. The Prophet in the modern imagination. For many Muslims, Muhammad is not just a figure of history but a living presence in their hearts and prayers. Poetry, literature, art, and song continue to celebrate his life. Around the world, scholars analyze his legacy, activists invoke his example, and families teach his stories to children as a moral compass. Even in secular scholarship, Muhammad is recognized as one of history's most influential figures. Historians note how he transformed Arabia in a single generation, and how his teachings created a civilization that preserved knowledge and advanced culture for centuries. Challenges and misunderstandings. In the modern era, Muhammad's relevance also brings challenges. Misunderstandings about his life and mission sometimes fuel prejudice or hostility. Yet each generation of Muslims reaffirms his example, clarifying misconceptions and reminding the world of his emphasis on mercy, justice, and humility. For many, his life serves as a bridge between faith and modernity, reminding people that spiritual principles can coexist with progress. Reflection, a timeless guide. Muhammad's enduring relevance rests on his humanity as much as his prophethood. He lived as a husband, father, friend, and leader, experiencing loss, hardship, triumph, and joy. This humanity allows people across centuries to see themselves in his struggles and victories. His relevance lies in the universality of his message, that life has meaning, justice is sacred, and compassion is stronger than cruelty. Closing scene for sleep. As you drift into rest, imagine the desert sands where Muhammad once walked, his footsteps fading into history but his light still glowing across the world. From the quiet cave of Hira to the bustling streets of modern cities, his words continue to guide hearts. 14 centuries later, his relevance endures, not as a distant memory, but as a living source of inspiration for billions. That concludes our episode for tonight. I hope you thoroughly enjoyed tonight's episode, and please consider subscribing if you'd like to stay updated for future daily uploads. Have a fantastic rest of your evening, and I'll see you in tomorrow's episode. Background Historian out.